Hello, my name is Heidi Pettit. I'm one of the librarians here at Loras College, and I'm a very big fan of PowerPoint, especially PowerPoint done well. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the most effective or defective PowerPoint presentations and give you some tips for how to fix them. So first, let's talk about what makes a presentation defective. Most common things are that wall of text, where you just have a ton of words on a screen that the presenter typically then reads from, or doesn't give you time to read as they're going through their presentation. Others are images that are too small, so the people in the back of the room can't actually follow along with the presentation. Graphics and other things moving around on the screen that makes it hard to focus on the presenter, and text and images that are, or text that's where the contrast isn't good enough, or fonts aren't very readable. So now that we know kind of what a defective presentation looks like, let's do talk a little bit about the science behind what makes a presentation good. So to start with, we need to realize that there are two different ways that humans in general take in information, in a presentation at least, and that's audio and visual kind of inputs. So your audio inputs are going to be narration, so someone talking at you, and also text that you read. I know it's technically a visual thing that you're reading, but it actually falls more in that audio input. And then visuals are graphics, animation, or text that is moving, so animated text rather than stable text. And this is the important thing to remember, 78% of your audience cannot process two inputs from the same category at the same time. So they have to preferentially take in one or the other. So if you have a wall of text and don't give your audience time to read, they'll read through the text and not be listening to you, or be listening to you and not be reading the text. They can't process both at the same time. So let's talk about what this is called is cognitive overload. So when you have both of those things happening at the same time, your brain just can't handle that amount of information and just takes them one preferentially over the other. Some inputs that work really well together are graphics and narration. So that can be a picture or something even that's more of a design thing, and then you talking about it. That's a really great way to present information. Animations and narration, so images that are moving or something happens, and then you're talking on top of that. Think of your typical cartoon. And then text and pictures, which is a bit boring for a presentation like we'll want to do for legacy. But if this is something that you're putting up afterwards for others to read, adding that text in along with the images can be really helpful. Things you want to avoid are graphics, narration, and text. That's just too much information. Animation and on-screen text. Your eyes can only really look at one thing. So if there's something moving, your eyes are going to want to look at the moving thing, and so you're not going to see the text. And then words alone, mostly just because they're kind of boring. So this is an example of a PowerPoint that we want to avoid, where we've just put a ton of information on the slide and we have this wall of text. So let's talk about some ways to break this up a bit. So first thing we want to talk about is converting bullet points to individual slides. Definitely take into consideration that, or to think about, fewer slides does not necessarily mean a shorter presentation. The number of slides does not actually correlate at all to the length of your presentation. Your length of your presentation is the amount of information you need to present, and flipping between slides is not going to add significantly to that. So if you had a slide with a bunch of information on it, like 5 or 6 bullet points, you're going to take the same amount of time to cover those bullet points as you would if you had those 5 or 6 things on 5 or 6 separate slides. And then you kind of want to highlight the main piece of information. So for example, when I was talking about that statistic, I've got the statistic, that's the important thing, that's the number I want you to take away. you can see that and then focus right back on me while I talk to you about what that 78% means. And then you can also convert bullet points to a labeled graphic. So this is a way to add a little bit of visual information while still kind of breaking up all of those bullet points. So in this case, I'm going to talk about the corn industry, I think, and I'm going to have bullet points that appear. And when I'm done talking about them, I want to move on to the next thing. They disappear and the next one appears. And I can go through, I think there's 5 or 6 bullet points within this slide. I'm only showing a small amount of text at one particular time. I've got a great visual, and my audience can really focus on me as I'm talking. But sometimes we want some of that information to stay behind. So what we can do instead is same graphic. So it's going to be the same text boxes actually. So I talk about this particular text box, and now I'm going to move on to my next topic within the same thing, but I'm going to change the colors a little bit. So the old bullet point that I was talking about, that's kind of grayed out a little bit, I think you can see. And the current bullet point is still that brighter blue color. So the audience knows which bullet point to focus on because it's the one that's bright and bold. But I can then go back and talk about another bullet point that's still on the screen. If I need to refer back to it, it doesn't go away so quickly. At the end, I end up with a really busy slide, but it didn't start out that way, and it builds on each other and keeps your audience focused kind of on the particular information that you're presenting in a really nice way. You can also convert your bullet points to icons and thumbnail images. So something like this, if I have a couple concepts I'm talking about, maybe I'm comparing them and this thing comes up, I can talk about behaviorism, have a little bit of text for them to read or a little bit of a definition or something, and then move on to my next topic and on to my last. And if you notice, I also made sure that the colors kind of correlated with the icon to help kind of tie those together. And I could conceivably continue with this and have other bullet points that kind of, or text boxes that appear as I continue through this. So it's still just leaving that one text box on there, and I can see how it applies to the other concepts that I'm discussing. But sometimes you really just have to cut. There's only so much time that you have to do the presentation. So sometimes you will just have to cut out some of the information that you were hoping to present. The nice thing about having stuff on multiple slides rather than one big slide is you can just pull that one slide out rather than having to go through and edit things to make it continue to look pretty if you pull out one bullet point in the middle of one slide. So now that we kind of have some ideas of how to deal with bullet points and get rid of the wall of text, let's talk about what your text should look like. So in this case, we've got this really pretty background. It's a great image. If I was talking about grass or grazing, or there's lots of things I might want this particular background for, but I've put text on top and it is really difficult to read. And that's a problem for your audience. So things we want to take into consideration, or a way to fix that, is to use some color boxes that help make your text stand out. So in this case, I've just added a text box, changed the color to one that kind of goes along with the image, and then added or decreased the transparency a little bit, or made it a little bit transparent. So you can still see the image behind the text box, so it still feels cohesive and pulled together, but it allows that text to stand out a lot more against that background. One other thing when you're thinking about it though is to make sure that you have enough contrast within your slides or between your text and your background, especially if you have an audience member who is either red, green, or totally colorblind. If you don't, what helps them be able to see stuff is that extra contrast. So in this case, to kind of help see that, I typically will print my slides in grayscale, just on a regular printer. And that can help me see kind of what the contrast is. So someone who's green colorblind within this, probably there's enough contrast for them to see the text on top of the image, and that the image still makes some sense to them. And then another thing is to make sure your picture is big enough for your audience to see it. So this is kind of a typical slide. I think we actually probably got this out of a textbook or something. And we've got this really great image that's kind of the focus of this particular slide. But anyone who's in the back of the room is not going to be able to read any of that. Even me just sitting here on my computer, I have to kind of squint my eyes a little bit to look and see that image clearly. So what I've done is just blow the image up. I have the same text on the screen. I've just kind of decentered it. I made it less important. It's still there. It's still very readable, with the same kind of colored background that we had on the other image slide. But now my image is big enough that pretty much anyone in the room should be able to see what I'm trying to demonstrate. And I can walk up to this slide and point at things, and people are going to be able to see and read those labels and actually interact with the picture. So I love animation. I think it is a great way to make your presentation stand out a little bit and to add a little bit of more visual interest. What you want to avoid is the 100 clicks I'm having to do to get through here, just to get to what I actually wanted to do was just to have this little frowny face jump in, just to add that little bit of a possible chuckle to your to my presentation. So we want to be careful to use animation very sparingly. A better option for this one would have just been to animate the frowny face and not worry about animating any of the other text on the screen. Takes a lot less time. It's a lot less work for me. I just have to click once to have this whole thing happen. Using animation can also be really helpful when you're trying to highlight key information. So in this case, if I was going to talk about where to pet this particular cat, I can have arrows that kind of pop in. It draws your eye to the area that I'm asking you to look at. Allows me to bring in some text at the same time. And then I can easily switch to another area. And again, just kind of helps bring your eye to that particular spot. Also within PowerPoint, there's this stuff called Smart Art. And usually this stuff is kind of related to graphs or hierarchies or cycles. So all different ways you can present things. So if you're presenting something that has a cycle or has parts, you can pull this in and you can analyze each particular step. So if I was talking about the ADDIE model, I can introduce the first part, and then we can go through this whole cycle and have things appear as I'm talking. So again, presenting just little chunks of information at a time rather than the whole thing to start with. You can also use timing to help limit the number of clicks that you're using. This can be really helpful if you're doing something just talking about like your introduction or what you're going to talk about during your presentation. One click, and if you've timed this ahead of time, you can go through your whole introduction really quickly, have everything appear, and then I don't have to click for each of these 5 different bullet points. I can just click once and have it run while I'm talking, and I don't have to think about it. This does take a little practice. I highly recommend practicing frequently before doing presentations. It really helps you kind of set in how long things are going to take and make sure that you're doing something pretty cohesive. So in summary, use more images and less text. This is a lot more engaging for your audience. You can use animation to help you reduce the amount of text, either by having things appear and disappear, or having things appear and then fade as the next bit appears. Pay careful attention to your text to make sure that any text you do put on your screen is readable, both for fonts and contrast, so that everyone, and largeness, so everyone can read it. And then use your animation, again, sparingly, but use it to really help you tell the story that you're trying to tell. If you have any questions, you can go to library.loras.edu/ask, and you'll find a bunch of different ways to get a hold of me or any of the other librarians, including chat, consultations, phone calls, or email. Anytime you see a Meet with a Librarian button, that'll send you somewhere where you can schedule an appointment with me or, again, any other librarian, and we'll be happy to sit down with you and go through your presentation and give you any tips or tricks or suggestions that we would have to make a stronger presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to seeing some really great PowerPoints on Legacy Day. Thanks.